Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 5 of season 3 of Babylon 5 Voices of Authority. Zack is worried about how his uniform is hanging and how itchy it is. Just as he and Garibaldi are about to get in a lift, Garibaldi gets a code 7R, a call to an Army of Light meeting. This puzzles Zack, who hasn't heard of this code before. Garibaldi bluffs and heads off. Delenn is explaining that whilst it is believed the first ones left 1,000 years ago beyond the galactic rim after the last Shadow conflict, on the basis that the Vorlons remained, it is possible that others did too, but have not engaged with the younger races. She decided that now is the time to go looking for them, to try and bring them into the fight once more, although Marcus notes that the Rangers have been told to stay away from the places they are known to have inhabited up to this point. Delenn agrees, but says they can no longer afford to wait as the Shadow threat looms. This action is not without risk, as just sending a signal won't do. Contact must be made in person. Then she has asked another to help the effort. Draal materialises in the room with them. He says it will be fun, if they don't get vaporised, dissected, or otherwise killed. As Draal finishes off his upbeat briefing, a Ministry of Peace rep meets Zack at arrivals, a Julia Sante. Zack clearly takes a shine to her, while she couldn't be less interested, and is clearly annoyed that the captain isn't there to greet her in person. G'Kar catches up with Delenn while she grocery shops. He makes it blatantly clear that he's discovered the existence of the Rangers, intrigued by their being both Minbari and human, and is going to keep on digging until he finds out what's going on. Delenn understandably plays a straight bat to his inquiries, but she knows he's not one to let it drop. Asante finally gets to say hello to Sheridan and declares herself his new political officer, a Ministry of Peace Nightwatch division role, aimed at avoiding the sort of unpleasantries we saw in the Fall of Night. He is not impressed because this is a military station, not a civilian one, so while she's got backing from the B5 Senate Committee, that's not his chain of command, and he's not impressed by her trying to assert this political officer role, no matter how helpful she might be trying to be. She arranges for them to have a dinner date to smooth the waters, right when he was supposed to be seeing Draal on the planet below. Orcs. So he delegates to Ivanova, whilst Zack takes Asante to her quarters, where she brings him in to tell her what's been going on, just until the captain warms up to her, because of course Zack is Nightwatch. Ivanova goes planetside and meets Draal, who is initially upset that it's her and not Sheridan, but then warms to her as she goes out of her way to placate him, declaring her trouble, which she takes as a compliment. At dinner, it soon becomes clear that things on Earth are changing to something bordering on Orwellian, as homeless people become displaced people, and the jobless have chosen to be jobless because there are jobs for everyone. It's government-level whitewashing, and Asante is just trying to make sure that Sheridan is suitably on message with a new version of the dictionary, which of course he isn't. She also seems to be coming on to him. Ivanova swaps places with Draal in the Great Machine, once he's actually remembered to move himself, and has dusted himself off, which he knows he should do more often. He's rigged it for her and set it not to panic because he's not attached, and encourages her not to stray from the path but open her mind. And her mind finds the path, taking her to Sigma 957, which we visited before in Season 1, and is a place the first ones will be returning to shortly. Yet as she senses their presence, she realises she is being watched, and moves her perception to see shadow eyes shining in the void, eyes that Draal calls the enemy, telling her to look away to return to the path. She thinks they know her name, but she manages to pull herself out and away from them, and while Draal encourages her to exit, she sees something else and continues to follow the path, observing the end of Earth Force 1 at Io, but also seeing a conversation between President Clark and Morden, although we don't see his face, where Clark says he's wanted former President Santiago dead for some time, and Morden tells him the power is now his. She finally leaves the machine, Draal amazed that her mind was able to pull that from the past, and confirming that he can get her a copy of the transmission. I'd forgotten this was in the episode, but this is a big game changer, because it's proof positive of Clark's involvement and desire for Santiago's death, beyond anything the conspiracy has had to throw at the regime before now. Asante has decided to move her relationship with Sheridan along by getting into his quarters, then out of her clothes, and into his pants. or that was the intention, up until Ivanova materialising behind her, which forces Sheridan into a clinch to distract her. He then moves into a more private area in his quarters, where Ivanova brings him up to speed on needing to head to Sigma 957 urgently, and leaves with the entertaining comment that this captain is about to go where everyone has been before. Wow. Sheridan, however, makes his excuses and leaves Asante hanging, and decidedly chilly because she's Starkers. Meanwhile, Jakar now confronts Garibaldi about the sudden growth in private meetings aboard the station, suggesting they're outdoing the Centauri. Jakar isn't stupid. He senses a gathering of power, and he hopes it's something that could benefit his people, but of course Garibaldi can't tell him what's going on. Instead, Jakar suggests he consider what he might be able to do for him. Garibaldi notes Zack's contact with Asante as she arranges a Nightwatch meeting. Ivanova meets up with Marcus on board the White Star, who will be acting as her liaison to her mild annoyance. But he says there's probably an Earthman Barrow dictionary lying around which she'd prefer. They jump for Sigma 957. Back on the station, Asante is making it clear that Nightwatch are not to criticise the government in any way and are to report on civilians doing so, taking into account past associations and generally policing the place to ensure it's ideologically sound. One officer calls this out as extreme, and she says it is, and that purges are imminent too, but this is what's necessary to protect Earth. It's also apparent certain freedoms could be curtailed as part of these actions. The fist tightens. Ivanova is basically going nuts being stuck waiting on the White Star, and Marcus tries to engage her in conversation, with her being decidedly icy towards him. Fortunately, the first ones break the moment by making their appearance, and their recognition code from S03 grants them an audience with a floating head on the White Star's bridge. Mention of the Vorlons provokes a reaction, with Ivanova realising this means they understand English even if they're not using it. Marcus wonders if they're French. Boom-tish. The head then vanishes, leaving them to wait some more as their massive ship, the same one we saw in Mind War from Season 1, hovers above the White Star, which experienced an energy drain initially as Catherine Sakai's ship did. Sheridan is reviewing the Clark clip Ivanova uploaded with Garibaldi, who agrees it needs to get out, but they can't do it without drawing too much attention to themselves. Sheridan is going to give it to Haig to get out instead, noting that there's a top secret sub-channel on such high-level transmissions which will prove its authenticity to those in the know. The first ones return and answer Zog before vanishing again, which leaves Ivanova without a clue. However, the ship starts to move off, but Ivanova refuses to give up, and Marcus offers to impersonate an ancient Vorlon god by putting a bucket on his head. Ivanova converts his wit into an idea and proceeds to taunt the departing first one with how great the Vorlons are. So great, in fact, they probably don't need them, but they'll be sure to let them know when it's safe so they can come back out again. This actually does the trick, and it turns out that they are French, as they tell her in English to come back to Sigma 957 when the time is right and call their name, and then they will help. Marcus looks suitably impressed. It turns out Haig got the story out fast. Garibaldi briefs his team to handle it delicately in public, as Asante is going back to Earth for damage control duties. He and Zack have a falling out over Nightwatch and trust issues, but when Zack later asks Asante about the non-existent official code 7R, he doesn't implicate Garibaldi, so although the relationship is frayed, it isn't broken. Sheridan is pleased that they have a first one behind them, and that the truth is out and causing turmoil in Earthdome, with Clark already spinning it as an alien plot to discredit him. Finally, Garibaldi is awoken by Jakar, who hands him the Book of Jaquan to study in order to help him. He protests that he doesn't read Narn, to which Jakar replies, "Learn." I remember the title of this one, but I'd forgotten just how much was packed into it, I must admit. You might recall I did a video a while back on why the first season of the show, whilst often underrated, is actually still utterly integral, and here we have a planet that was established back in the 6th episode of Season 1, returning to play an important part in the ongoing story, even though it was left shrouded in mystery back then. Season 1 also established the Great Machine on Epsilon 3, so there really is no getting away from just how intricately planned out this all is for those who care about such things. Sadly ironic, actually, because for the old hands, we can be pretty confident about who Ivana was going to meet, whilst they'll be completely new for those newer to the show. It works at both levels, and of course we also get the bonus of some amusing interaction with the Zog first ones, who clearly have some beef with the Vorlons from one of the earlier conflicts, yet are ready to stand with the younger races. Marcus has some great dry British gag lines as well. It's a very fun character because he doesn't really have to treat Ivanova with deference because he's not in her official chain of command. It's an amusing dynamic. Draal is very droll. He still has his own dry wit and remains true to that character here too, although it's interesting to see how he looks after and seeks to protect Ivanova as she interacts with and through the Great Machine. There was generally a moment where we felt she might be in danger there, and Draal has her back, even though he can't physically pull her out because it would harm her too. And of course that interaction, possibly deeper than he expected because of her latent telepathy, leads to the unlocking of the Clark conspiracy and reinforces something we found out at the start of the season, that Morden has a lot of space miles on his ident card. When he's not been dealing with Londo, he's been dealing with Earthdome. Shadows working in the shadows. Well, they would, I suppose. The political officer is interesting. I think the Communist parties used to use this sort of position to make sure the party line was being adhered to. Fascinating that she was even willing to use sex to get Sheridan on side. It's almost as if she's using Orwellian doublethink on herself, so she can tell Sheridan how manipulative they're actually being without acknowledging that there's anything actually wrong with that. As we saw in The Fall of Night, she's prepared to affirm his military position as being technically correct, but she wants to steer him without controlling him, so that he does things without causing ripples back home. And of course, this is what Sheridan is a useful tool for. Why Sheridan is a useful tool for Haig. As a surface level, he looks like he'll carry the can as he should, but as he makes clear here, there's no way he's going to tolerate someone with civilian authority trying to overturn his presidential mandate. And by her own internal logic, she can't go against that either. So it's something of an uneasy truce that gets formed until she gets pulled back to earth, of course. There's no way they could have functioned as they needed to with her around, but of course she's inflicted a degree of damage locally by effectively upgrading what the Nightwatch are allowed to do, and in the process driven a wedge between Zack and Garibaldi. So, by the end of the episode, the light side has got 2 wins. They've got a new ally, and they've exposed Clark. But there is a question over whether they've tipped their hand to the shadows because Ivana was seen by them using the Great Machine. And of course Zack and Jakar may both be causes of concern as things accelerate. Very much a bigger picture sort of episode, and it moves the story on a lot, where Gethsemane last time was more self-contained. I think the really key moment here is Ivanova accessing the Earth Force 1 destruction, and that heartfelt hope she has to be able to warn them, which Draal has to sadly explain she can't do. But nonetheless, this gives them the hope for victory that this season is all about. So a cracking tale out of the blue, and a nice example of the intermixing of the Shadow War and Earth situations to both introduce and resolve the political officer issue through Ivanova's quest for the first ones. Very cleverly paced to fit it all in without it feeling forced or rushed. Really interesting actually, because I just finished properly watching The Orville, and its seasons are so short compared to the science fiction shows of the 90s. I wonder how you'd compress Babylon 5 into the modern formats that seem to be the norm these days. Just more seasons, I suppose. Maybe one I'll post to JMS, which in fact I have done, but I haven't got an answer yet. I'll catch you for the next one, where I imagine we'll see more fallouts from these happenings.